During World War II, American gardens were a matter of pride. Families grew food, herbs, and flowers not just for beauty, but for survival. But what if I told you that most of these plants can no longer be planted in your gardens simply because they're now illegal? What changed? It wasn't the plants, it was us. Keep watching, because I'm going to show you 20 garden crops that were legal during World War II but can't be grown freely today. And why? Castor bean. In the 1940s, the castor bean plant stood tall and proud in many American victory gardens. Its bold red pods and star-shaped leaves gave a tropical touch to otherwise plain backyards. Farmers even grew it by the acre for one reason: castor oil. It was a household staple used to lubricate machinery, treat wounds, and serve as a medicine chest cure-all. No one suspected danger in those shiny seeds glinting under the sun. But inside, each one lies ricin, a deadly toxin so potent that just a few beans can kill an adult. As suburban neighborhoods grew and more children began playing outdoors, the risk became impossible to ignore. By the 1950s, nurseries stopped selling it, and local garden clubs quietly warned families to dig them up. The plant that once symbolized healing and victory became a deadly relic of the war years. Kudzu. During the Great Depression and the war that followed, Kudzu was hailed as the miracle vine that could save America's soil. It grew fast, fed livestock, and stopped erosion on hills stripped bare by drought. The government even paid farmers to plant it, turning fields green again and keeping the dust storms at bay. It worked too well. Kudzu grew over barns, fences, and trees, a foot a day in summer, wrapping itself around everything in reach. What began as a patriotic crop soon became a botanical invader, spreading across the South faster than anything could stop it. By the 1970s, entire counties were buried under a green tide. Roadsides, power lines, and even houses disappeared beneath its vines. Once celebrated as the vine that won the war, Kudzu became the poster child for invasion, teaching America a lesson about good intentions gone wild. Opium Poppy. The opium poppy was once a familiar sight in wartime gardens, with its bright petals glowing pink, white, and violet against rows of vegetables. Families grew it for the same reason their grandparents had: the tiny seeds. They flavored breads, rolls, and pastries, and even served as a trade staple during rationing. But hidden inside the same pods that fed families lay the raw material for opium, morphine, and heroin. When post-war America cracked down on narcotics, the poppy's innocent charm vanished overnight. Home gardeners were warned that even decorative cultivation could be treated as a federal offense. By the mid-1950s, a flower once prized for its beauty and flavor had become a symbol of addiction and crime. Its graceful blooms disappeared from victory gardens, leaving behind only faded memories and the uneasy truth that not every old-fashioned crop could survive the new world that followed the war. Water spinach, Kong Kong. Water spinach looked like a dream crop during the war years. It grew fast, required almost no care, and produced tender green leaves that tasted like a mix between spinach and kale. Soldiers returning from Asia had seen it thriving in rice paddies, feeding entire villages, and thought it would be perfect for home gardens back in the States. The problem was that it didn't know when to stop growing. Once introduced to warm wetlands and irrigation canals, water spinach spread endlessly, forming dense mats that choked out native plants and clogged waterways. Even a tiny stem left behind could start a new colony. Farmers quickly learned that what fed families overseas could cripple their own irrigation systems. Today, most states ban its cultivation or possession, even for ornamental ponds. What was once prized as a quick-growing food source turned into one of the country's most persistent aquatic pests: giant hogweed. During World War II, soldiers returning home often brought back exotic seeds they'd seen overseas, eager to add something bold to their gardens. One of those was giant hogweed, a towering plant with umbrella-sized white flowers and thick green stalks that could reach 15 feet high. It looked majestic, like something out of a storybook, and quickly became a curiosity in suburban yards. But this imported beauty hid a dangerous secret. The sap contains compounds that react violently with sunlight, burning the skin and leaving scars that can last for years. Even brushing against it during the weeding could cause blistering pain. As cases of severe burns spread, states began banning its cultivation outright. By the 1970s, giant hogweed had gone from prized ornamental to public menace. What once symbolized post-war optimism became one of the most feared plants ever introduced to American soil: Japanese knotweed. At first glance, Japanese knotweed seemed harmless, even useful. Its young shoots looked like tender bamboo, and during the war, families boiled them into soups or baked them into pies when sugar was scarce. It offered a tart, lemony flavor and grew almost anywhere, thriving in bombed lots and abandoned fields. But what made it easy to grow also made it impossible to control. Its roots spread 10 feet deep and 60 feet wide, breaking through concrete, creeping into basements, and choking out every other plant in its path. A single stem fragment could start a new colony. By the time suburban construction boomed after the war, knotweed had already invaded roadsides and rivers across the country. Homeowners who once admired its strength soon found it destroying their walls and driveways. What began as a resilient wartime food plant became one of America's most unstoppable garden invaders. Water hyacinth. Few plants looked more peaceful than water hyacinth. Floating on ponds with its lavender blooms and soft, spongy leaves, it brought a touch of tropical beauty to American backyards. During the 1940s, families even tried cooking their tender stalks, frying them with garlic, or adding them to soups. But the same qualities that made it thrive in garden ponds turned it into a national threat. Water hyacinth multiplies faster than almost any other plant on Earth, doubling its size in just 2 weeks. It clogs rivers, blocks sunlight, and starves fish of oxygen, leaving behind stagnant, lifeless water. By the 1950s, it had swallowed entire lakes in the South. Authorities scrambled to contain it, but it was already too late. A plant once admired for its beauty and grace became a symbol of nature's quiet rebellion and a reminder that not every bloom belongs in a backyard. Coca Plant. The coca plant never looked dangerous. Just a small green shrub with glossy leaves, it could have passed for any ordinary garden plant. During World War II, American scientists studied it for its potential to help pilots stay alert at high altitudes, a reflection of its traditional use in the Andes, where people chewed the leaves to fight fatigue and hunger. But those same leaves held the raw material for cocaine. What had been a cultural staple for centuries suddenly became a global symbol of addiction and crime. By the late 1940s, the U.S. government placed strict bans on its cultivation, even for research. Farmers who once grew it legally under government supervision were forced to destroy their crops. Today, not even a single coca shrub can be grown without federal approval. A plant once tied to survival became one of the most heavily policed in the world. Purple loosestrife. Purple loosestrife looked like the perfect garden flower. Tall spires of violet blooms swaying over ponds and ditches. Families planted it freely during and after the war to brighten up the edges of farm fields and attract bees for honey. Even the young leaves were sometimes cooked like spinach in old European kitchens. But beauty became a curse. Each plant can release over 2 million seeds a year, carried easily by wind and water. Before long, it crowded out cattails, sedges, and nearly every native wetland plant, starving out ducks, frogs, and fish. By the 1970s, entire marshes had turned into seas of purple. States began banning the sale and burning all infected areas, totaling several acres. What started as a splash of color for victory gardens became one of America's most destructive invaders, proving that not every pretty flower deserves a second chance. Peyote cactus peyote never grew tall or imposing. It was just small, button-shaped mounds barely rising from the soil. To the untrained eye, it looked harmless, even friendly. But its true power lay inside those little buttons, which contain mescaline, a hallucinogenic compound that had been sacred to Native American tribes for centuries. During the war years, a few curious gardeners even tried growing peyote for its rarity, unaware of its deeper spiritual meaning. After the 1940s, however, federal authorities placed it under strict control, classifying it alongside dangerous narcotics. Only members of certain Native American tribes retained the right to grow and use it for religious purposes. For everyone else, it became forbidden ground. What once symbolized visions and prayer on desert nights became another plant outlawed by law, not for its beauty or harm, but for the power it carried within. Giant Salvinia. At first glance, giant Salvinia looked delicate. Tiny floating leaves like green velvet, clustered neatly on pond surfaces. In the 1940s, some people used it to decorate garden ponds, and even harvested the fronds for cooking in certain coastal cuisines. But what seemed like a peaceful addition to backyard water gardens quickly turned disastrous. Giant Salvinia doubles in size every few days, forming thick mats that block sunlight and choke out everything below. Fish die. Oxygen levels plummet, and water systems grind to a halt. By the 1970s, lakes and rivers across the South were smothered in green carpets of it. States began outlawing its sale, and heavy fines followed for anyone caught growing or transporting it. What was once admired for its beauty became a floating menace, showing how something so small can quietly overtake entire ecosystems. Tree of Heaven. The name sounded almost holy, but Tree of Heaven turned out to be anything but. It first appeared in American cities as an easy, fast-growing shade tree during the early 1900s, and later spread into wartime gardens where it thrived in poor soil with no care at all. Its tall trunks and fern-like leaves gave neighborhoods a quick touch of green, and many believed it to be a blessing for barren land. But the roots told another story. They release chemicals that poison nearby plants and even crack sidewalks, foundations, and sewer lines in their reach. The tree spreads through thousands of airborne seeds and underground suckers, forming entire colonies within a few years. Worse, it became the primary host for the spotted lanternfly, one of the most destructive invasive insects in America. By the 1950s, the heavenly tree had become a curse, banned in many states for its aggressive takeover. Autumn olive. Autumn olive fooled nearly everyone. Its silvery leaves shimmered in sunlight, and its red berries looked harmless, even inviting. In the 1940s, it was praised as a miracle plant. The government encouraged farmers to grow it for erosion control, wildlife food, and even roadside beautification. Those berries, rich in vitamin C and antioxidants, made excellent jellies and syrups, and families picked them by the basketful. But autumn olive refused to stay where it was planted. Birds carried their seeds for miles, and the shrubs grew into dense, impenetrable thickets that smothered native plants. It thrived in poor soil and dry conditions, spreading faster than anyone imagined. By the time officials realized the extent of the damage, it had already overrun fields and forests. Once promoted as a patriotic crop for conservation, it ended up blacklisted and became a living reminder that not every good idea belongs in the garden. Khat didn't look like trouble, just a neat leafy shrub that blended easily among hedges or flower borders. Its tender green leaves, however, contained a natural stimulant once prized across East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula for long workdays and social gatherings. Immigrants brought seeds with them during the war years, hoping to keep their traditions alive in their new gardens. But U.S. officials saw something different. The compound in those leaves, cathinone, had effects similar to amphetamines. Reports of misuse spread, and soon Khat was classified as a controlled substance. By the 1980s, federal agents treated the plant the same way they would a narcotic. What had once been a cultural symbol of hospitality and endurance became contraband overnight. A plant once shared in celebration could now bring severe penalties. Proof that the line between heritage and hazard can be thin in the eyes of the law. Multiflora Rose. Multiflora Rose once stood for practicality. During World War II, when barbed wire was scarce, farmers planted these thorny shrubs as living fences. They grew fast, formed dense walls, and even fed wildlife through winter with bright red rose hips rich in vitamin C. In those days, it seemed like the perfect multi-use plant, a natural barrier, a vitamin source, and a hardy ornamental. But once the war ended, the rose refused to stop expanding. Its arching canes sprawled over fields and forests, shading out native plants and swallowing entire pastures. Each bush could produce 500,000 seeds a year, carried far by birds and wind. By the 1970s, entire states were overrun. What started as a patriotic planting effort turned into one of the country's worst invasive species problems. The living fence became an unbreakable prison of thorns, banned in most regions and remembered as a cautionary mistake. Hydrilla began as an aquarium favorite, admired for its delicate green whorls and ability to oxygenate tanks. During wartime, it was even tested in ponds and waterways as a natural purifier. But once it escaped, it spread faster than anyone imagined. A single fragment drifting downstream could root and multiply, forming thick underwater forests that blocked sunlight and strangled fish habitats. By the time people realized what had happened, Hydrilla had taken over lakes, reservoirs, and rivers across the South. It jammed boat motors, clogged irrigation systems, and turned once clear waters into stagnant traps. Entire industries spent millions trying to remove it, only for it to grow right back. What had been an innocent aquarium plant in the 1940s became one of America's most destructive aquatic weeds, Betel Nut Palm. The Betel Nut Palm was once admired for its tropical grace. With smooth gray trunks and feathery fronds, it gave gardens and porches the look of island calm. During the war era, travelers brought seeds home from Asia, where the small orange fruits were widely chewed as a mild stimulant. The nuts were sliced, wrapped in leaves with lime, and shared in gatherings much like coffee or tobacco. To early gardeners it seemed exotic but harmless, a touch of the tropics for post-war America. But science later told a darker story. Regular chewing was linked to mouth cancer, gum disease, and heart problems. Health agencies eventually cracked down, banning its cultivation and sale in most states. What began as a symbol of faraway beauty ended as a public health warning. The palms disappeared from American yards, remembered only in old postcards of island gardens that once swayed in the breeze. Garlic mustard. Garlic mustard looked harmless, with its heart-shaped leaves and clusters of tiny white flowers. Settlers brought it over from Europe centuries ago, valuing it as both food and medicine. The leaves were rich in flavor, and after a long winter, they were among the first greens to appear in spring. But the plant carried a secret weapon. It releases chemicals into the soil that prevent other plants from growing nearby, a process now known as allelopathy. Before long, forests carpeted in wildflowers turned into silent stretches of garlic mustard. Its roots crowded out natives, its seeds lingered for years, and no animal wanted to eat it. By the time it was recognized as a threat, it had spread across half the country. What began as a trusted herb became an invader that altered entire ecosystems, banned wherever conservation still had a chance to fight back. Brazilian Elodea. Brazilian Elodea was once prized for its elegance. Its feathery green stems swayed gracefully underwater, making it a favorite in aquariums and garden ponds. Imported during the early 20th century, it was promoted as a natural filter that kept water clear and oxygen-rich. But the very traits that made it attractive soon made it unstoppable. A single cutting tossed into a stream could grow several inches a day, filling entire ponds within weeks. Beneath the surface, it formed dense tangles that trapped fish, blocked sunlight, and depleted oxygen. Boats couldn't pass, irrigation lines clogged, and once clear lakes turned into stagnant green traps. By the time bans were issued, it had already spread across dozens of states. What began as a decorative import became a costly nuisance, a silent green invader that reminded America that beauty and destruction often grow from the same roots. Water chestnut. The water chestnut was once considered a reliable wartime crop. It thrived in shallow ponds and produced crisp, nutty seeds that stored well through winter. Families harvested them by hand, their baskets filling with shiny brown shells that cracked open to reveal tender, edible nuts. The crop seemed perfect, fast-growing, nutritious, and easy to cultivate. But like many imports, it didn't know when to stop. The floating leaves spread rapidly, blanketing lakes and choking out native plants. The sharp, spiny husks hidden beneath the surface injured swimmers and tore through fishing nets. Entire waterways became unusable for boating or wildlife. By the 1950s, the same plant that once fed families had turned into a national pest. Today, the water chestnut is banned in most states. Its story is a reminder that even the most promising crops can overstay their welcome. Which of these 20 crops and plants do you remember? Did you know they were illegal before now? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this interesting, leave a hype and subscribe for more.